The Turkish flag is pretty much identical to that of its predecessor, the Ottoman Empire, and that was a state flag for over 100 years. However, the origins of both the red field and the crescent are a bit of a mystery, so what I'm going to do is throw out a bunch of possibilities and let you decide, starting with the red field. But a little backstory, many Muslim states before the Ottomans used one-colour flags and they occasionally had an inscription on. This tradition probably predated Islam, but was adopted by Muhammad, the four rightly guided caliphs, and successive caliphates like the Fatimids and Umayyads. And the colours they used lay the groundwork for what would become the Pan-Arab colours. But although red was used by some early states like those in Al-Andalus, it was allegedly used by the Kharijites. They were a strict sect of Muslims during the first fitna, which assassinated Ali. And in Persia, the Muhammira rebelled against the Abbasids, and their name literally means red because of the colour of their robes, and in the 16th century the Turkic Shias who fought for the Persians were called Kizilbash because of their red headwear. So red could be seen as a rebellious colour, or at the very least not a very regal one. Plus the Seljuks, who were essentially the predecessors to the Ottomans like many Turkic groups, seem to have favoured blue. So it seems unlikely that the Ottomans adopted red because of any previous state, so I try to find another source like tug banners, a banner made out of horsehair used by Turkic people. There's some evidence to show that the Mongols in the west used some red tugs as opposed to the usual black and white, and Tamerlane, another Turkic leader, seems to have used both red tugs and banners according to some images. And there are some red Ottoman tugs that have been found, but they're the minority as I found more black and white tugs. So because that seems unlikely, here's another theory. There's one story which claimed the Seljuk Sultan gave Osman, the first Ottoman ruler, a white flag. So some theorise that this was the first royal colour, and was then the colour of the Janissaries' headgear. But because they were slaves, the Spahis, who were free men, chose to differentiate themselves by wearing red. And there are many images which show the armies having both red and white headgear, so this could be true. And since the Spahis were free men, more free men began using red banners, and so too did the court and state. However, the Ottomans used many colours on their banners throughout the 16th and 17th century. This was largely just to help organise troop movements in the battles, but there still doesn't seem to be a national colour either. For instance, a 16th century Portuguese cartographer shows more blue flags in Anatolia, and even at sea there were many colours used. Both European and Ottoman artists show all sorts of flags being used on ships, and Hayreddin Barbarossa, the 16th century admiral, flew a green flag, which I'll get back to in a little bit. However, by the 17th century siege of Vienna, red seems to be the only colour used. But it was still a long process, which leads me to believe there was no real reasoning behind it. But if that's not satisfactory, I'll give you two more theories. It could have been inherited from Europe and the Byzantine Empire, where it was seen more like a royal colour or a warring colour than in the Islamic world. For instance, the Byzantines often used red on their banners, and many Ottoman soldiers came from abroad. Now this is just me speculating, and it may sound unbelievable at first, but keep it in mind later on when I discuss the crescent. And as for the second theory, it might just be a case of convenience. Now this happened a lot in history. For instance, the English redcoats are only red because the dyes were cheaper, and Ottoman clothes and textiles seem to have been overwhelmingly red, showing it was either easily produced and or fashionable. And because of that, it found its way into the battlefield more and more, and into the courts. So take your pick as to which is the most believable out of all those theories as to why red was chosen, but let's go back to Barbarossa's flag. Now this is interesting because it features four things common with early Turkish flags, and will bring me eventually onto the crescent. First of all, the inscription. Now this goes back to the times of Muhammad and can be seen on the Ottoman flags captured during the siege of Vienna, and of course it's still common on Islamic flags today. Then there's the crossed zulfikars. Now these are a type of sword that was apparently given to Ali by Muhammad. It was therefore an Islamic symbol of war and can be seen in flags in India flown by the Mughals, and according to this 19th century chart it was also used in Morocco. But interestingly, Saudi Arabia doesn't feature this sword on its flag, and Oman has its traditional dagger, the khanjar, on its flag. Otherwise, Barbarossa also has on his flag what we now largely call the Star of David. But in the early Muslim world, it was called the Seal of Solomon, something that Arabian writers said was given to Solomon and gave him magic powers. It was of course used by Jews, Christians, and Eastern religions beforehand, but this is to be expected given its simple design. But because of its long and complicated history, I'll talk more about it when I do a video on the Israeli flag or the Moroccan flag, as they share a somewhat similar history. But for this story, because of its supposed magical powers, some Muslim states flew it on their banners. For instance, the 14th century Catalan atlas say it was the flag of Karaman, a small Turkish beylik. This, like many of the flags in the atlas, could be fictional. However, there is evidence to show that it was used at the time by many Muslims and featured on many coins. The Catalan atlas also shows many Muslim rulers of North Africa using a crescent, the final symbol on Barbarossa's flag. Now, despite the crescent being associated with Islam today, this wasn't always the case. The pre-Islamic Persians used it to represent Sin, the moon god. In ancient Anatolia, Mithridates of Pontus used it, and it can also be found in ancient Macedonia, Rome, and even ancient Britain, like on the coins of the Celtic king Tasciovanus. But it was used a great deal by the Byzantine Empire and began to be associated with the region. So many crusaders like Raymond of Toulouse and Richard Lionheart continued to use the crescent on coins, and it spread into Europe. It began to be used on many coat of arms and began to represent the Virgin Mary. However, given its connection to Constantinople, many say that the Ottomans took the symbol as their own after the conquest of the city. However, the Catalan Atlas predates the conquest, and so too does the work of Hayton of Coricus, an Armenian geographer. He shows in a battle the Seljuks using the crescent, and the Mongols had this strange flag. But in other pictures, the Seljuks used the old Mongol flag, while the Mongols used the hexagram. And in another 14th century image, the Seljuks seem to have a turtle, and the Mongols had a portrait of someone. So you would assume that they're not accurate, but it seems like the crescent was used by the Seljuks to some extent. And there are Seljuk coins which have the crescent on as well. And given the crescent's easy design and long history in the region, I would guess it was at least used before the conquest by some Muslim rulers. However, it was the Ottomans who began using it more and more, and it became incredibly popular in the 16th century. Like on this imagining of the Battle of Lepanto, where all flags are portrayed to use it. But like with the Mughals, who also began to use the crescent, they were also used alongside other types of flags. However, keeping with the Mughals, they put something on top of the Taj Mahal which makes me think the crescent has nothing to do with Persia or the Byzantines. It's called a tamga, and it's a type of stamp used to represent clans, families and tribes, and it's used by many Turkic nomadic people. The Gok Turks, Mongols, Crimean Tatars, and pretty much every Turkic group used them. The Ottomans and Mughals were both originally Turkic, so it's possible that the crescent was a sort of tamga. There are markings on an early Ottoman armour which show a potential Ottoman tamga, and it looks something like this. The Mughals obviously had a very similar one, and both seem somewhat similar to the sign of Tengrism, the old Turkic religion. And seeing as though the Mughals put their tamga on top of the Taj Mahal, you could assume that the Ottomans did the same with important buildings in their empire, i.e. mosques. Some of the most important mosques in the world today, notably in Saudi Arabia, still don't have crescents on them, and there are miniatures showing mosques in 16th century Persia without crescents. But Ottoman mosques from very early on seem to have a crescent on, but they don't necessarily always feature a star. And some early crescents like that on Gul Baba's tomb in Budapest look more Turkic than Byzantine. So it seems that potentially for secular reasons the Ottomans removed crosses off churches in lands they had conquered and replaced it with the crescent. And in my opinion at least, it seems a little bit implausible that the Ottomans would use a Byzantine symbol to show their authority over the Byzantine Empire. However, it could well have been fused with the iconography of the old Byzantine Empire. Had it just been taken from the Byzantine Empire, you would expect it to become a dominant banner very early on. But if it was placed above mosques, you could expect it to eventually become a religious icon, and this would explain why it took so long to become the dominant banner over the old religious banners, like the inscribed flag, the Seal of Solomon, and the Sulfurcars. But just to prove that that was just my theory and might be rubbish, I should say that the crescent was still very popular in Christian countries as well, so they could well have just copied it. The Koronek Armorial in the 16th century shows many fictionalized coats of arms from past families and rulers in the Balkans. Now, this practice of just making up arms isn't rare, by the way. It's called attributed arms. Jesus was given arms, and you could say that the hexagram being associated with Solomon was something very similar. It was given to old kings who probably never had coat of arms, and one of the three wise men was interestingly given a crescent in the Ingram Codex in the 15th century. But the Koronek Armorial used crescents for the arms of many regions and even the Kingdom of Bosnia. So on some of the arms associated with Stephen Dusan of Serbia, the crescent is quite prominent. So the crescent has been used for a long time within Christian nations, and as such can still be seen on coats of arms like Tarnov in Poland, Portsmouth in England, and South Carolina. But it was particularly prominent in the Balkans and Old Byzantine Empire, so the Ottomans could well have just taken it. So to sum that all up, both the choice of red and the crescent remain a bit of a mystery. The choice of red could have come from previous Arab flags, Turkic flags, Spahi headdresses, or just a convenient colour. And the crescent could have been taken from the Byzantine Empire or the Balkans, or even Persia or Pontus for that matter. It could have been a Turkic symbol brought from the east, or could have just been created by somebody looking at the moon. Either way, the crescent on a red field became popular over time and became the state flag of the Ottoman Empire in the late 18th century. And because the crescent was put on mosques, and because the Ottomans were such a powerful force in the Islamic world for centuries, the crescent became a symbol of Islam. Well, for many, some scholars still reject it, but the crescent is now featured on many flags of Muslim countries around the world. There's Turkmenistan, Singapore, Azerbaijan, Pakistan, Malaysia, Libya, Mauritania, and many more.